and we are back with another Diffusion podcast episode. And today we have Felipe Oriá, former Director of Government Affairs for Binance in Brazil and currently based in Hong Kong. Philip, welcome and please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you very much. And before introducing myself, let me just take a second to congratulate you personally and the whole team behind the podcast. I mean, I think you guys are doing an amazing job. Very few podcasts are discussing the Web3 network state, the whole future of the internet in such detail and depth. So just really wanted to take the time to really congratulate you on those efforts and invite everybody to listen, not only to this one, but to the whole series.
Amazing. Well, I try my best to be very comprehensive and everything we talk about and don't end up very superficial. But yeah, it's great to have I think informed guesses as well when it comes to what is being built, not only on a network state level, which is a governance level, but also on a technological level when it comes to blockchain. So Felipe, you have plenty experience with legal frameworks. You have been involved, and of course, at Binance, like a reshaping of compliance structure when it comes to Brazil. But I'll leave like a good space for you to talk about your experience, but also bring your vision of the future of Latin America legal frameworks.
Awesome. Happy to. First of all, let me just start by answering your initial question, a quick introduction. So I've been in this intersection of government, public policy, and technology for about 10 years. And this intersection basically is what we call regulation. I've done that from the three sectors, from government, from academia, and in this late phase from the private sector. So that means that I've worked all the way from local municipalities to the Brazilian presidency, in the private sector, have done a lot of regulatory work all the way from Uber to Binance to many other companies, both global and local, in that universe of AI, of computer vision, and everything that is very frontier and very hard to explain to the average politician and to the average regulator, as we were discussing. Right now, as you mentioned, I'm based in Hong Kong, currently a fellow at the University of Hong Kong and the director of the Mirã Institute, which is a think tank / consultancy institute exactly to try to help pull initiatives like the Tools for the Commons in turning them into regulatory viable projects, particularly in Latin America. And jumping into your question, I think Latin America is one of the regions around the world with the most institutional flexibility. And I'm saying that not only on consolidated industries like crypto. I'm happy to share some more experiences of Binance, but basically anything you can think of, I'm sure that the best region to where you can find politicians, regulators, and government officials willing to experiment, either through sandboxes or through very bold political experiments, is Latin America. I mean, I don't think it's an accident that it was the first place where Bitcoin became legal tender, and where if you look at initiatives such as WorldCoin and the whole orb scanning, that's the region where they have most of their orbs, right? So I think that's the world has a lot to learn from the things that are going on there, because it's definitely a window into the future.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I also worked in Binance, and I could not stop thinking this also might be the opportunity for Latin America and Brazil specifically to get closer to more developed economies as well. I see, like, for years, the economical development has been hinged to geographical constraints, but now with the digital infrastructure that we have today, and of course with the compliance moving forward, we might be able to catch up with the rest of the world. So from your perspective, with the compliance and regulations evolving, how far Brazil is when it comes to regions like Asia?
All right, so that's actually a great question. So first of all, I don't think Brazil is far behind at all when it comes to the regulatory frameworks. Brazil, and I think Latin American as a whole, and the numbers show that, and you can look at any area, we are tech enthusiasts, right? So if you want to launch any type of tech innovation, you can come to the continent. So that necessarily means that things arrive to the region and things grow in the region earlier than in many other places. Therefore, they do grow before regulations are in place, which creates a big gray zone, right? So, I mean, and in Brazil, I mean, we know in Brazil, particularly the fraud and a lot of the difficulty to access the justice system, prosecution, the whole legal apparatus can move quite slow, which makes for a very fertile terrain. So that gives very fertile terrain for those who want to misuse those technologies. So that does give an impression of a region without very consolidated regulation, but it's actually on the other way around. I mean, Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Colombia, all those countries are quite advanced. Chile also on regulating crypto, regulating the industry as a whole, having clear rules for fiat ramps, for consumer protection, for anti-money laundering. So I think we're well positioned. We're not behind Asia. Asia's maybe just moves a bit slower in more conservative ways, prioritizing security. So I think that does give a bit of an impression that those markets are growing maybe in a more healthy way there, which can be in part true, but it's definitely not because we're lagging behind from at least not from a legal and regulatory perspective.
That's good to hear. Because look, if you're not well connected to the global realities, it's difficult for you to understand how different regions are developing themselves. So that's why we created this think tank as well. So like, especially get people that understand what is going in Brazil, but also understand what is going outside Brazil. From my perspective, Brazilians as a whole are very open to tech innovation. When it comes to regulation as well, it is very interesting. I have legal background as well, and most people don't know, but like one of the, I think, like the most important regulations in Brazil that we had in regards to data, yeah, uh, came from the GDPR in Europe. So Brazilians as well are quite open to mirror like more advanced regulations that come from foreign countries and turn into their own legislation. I think the same will happen with the European AI Act. They have something quite, let's say, robust in Europe, and in Brazil they already start talking about like mirroring their own regulation. So moving towards a world where we might face, like more interoperability between institutions and governments. Do you believe we might reach a point where legislation and regulations from different countries start merging to each other, and then we move towards a single universal regulation and make things easier to be adapted and adopted?
All right, so that's an amazing question, and I think there's many points to unfold there. Let me start by one thing, and just a provocation. First of all, yes, you're completely right. So in Brazil, the LGPD, which is our acronym for the data protection law, does mirror a lot the GDPR. Uh, and there are, yes, a lot of trends to do that the same to copy that same pattern in AI regulation. uh, I think that can be very dangerous. I think that one thing that, since I'm in Hong Kong, I think the Chinese do very well, which is what they call the four confidences, which is trusting a lot of your own vision, your own culture, your own intellectuals to then push regulation that makes sense for your country, and not copy it. I think it's something that Brazil can learn. But to answer your question objectively, are we heading towards integrated regulation? My provocation is that the world still hasn't been able to coordinate efforts in the main activity that governments do, which is tax. So if they cannot coordinate actions in taxing, and international tax rules are still so diverse and still have so many loopholes, and that goes from tax havens all the way to tax complexity and uncertainty. When we're speaking of secondary issues, I think that's an even harder aim to achieve. And this, though, it's also a big opportunity, right? I think that whenever we see things that have value that governments haven't been able to do, and now that we have the possibility to do through technology, especially through decentralized technology, I think that's where lies the big opportunity for Web3, for initiatives that go beyond just service delivery, but are actually building communities to access almost public infrastructure, which is in large part what Tools for the Commons is doing, and just open a new realm of rights and citizenship that is parallel to the one that we're used to, very tied to geographies and to traditional public institutions.
Felipe, this is a subject that actually excites me a lot. So I'll be careful here and try to be as objective as I can. But well, when it comes to Web3 as well, we're talking about new forms of social organizations. It's a new internet where information moves fast, but also implementation of governance policies occur on a network level, but also on a protocol level. I'm not sure. Again, like this is a talk that we can explore different topics, but feel free to jump on whatever you feel like you're interested to. But there is something happening on a protocol level in Web3, and governance has been a problem. We have you know things like plutocracy, where people that have more token have more voice, and then you don't have a real democracy. But the interesting part of it that most people don't realize is we are creating also digital sandboxes where we can try and experiment very fast. I think rapid experimentation, it's one of the highlights when it comes to Web3. And some things clearly didn't work. But the good part of it is that we are not like hurting the public, let's say, and the social spectrum. People are not being affected by it, in a sense that you don't have to enforce things that you are not sure will work in the national level. You can try in a very controlled environment. And that's probably where special economic zones also enter, digital free zones that we are working with, Tools for the Commons, as you mentioned. It's difficult to get people together on one single vision about, for example, taxes, especially. But I think with the emergence of digital free zones, we can try more things rapidly and know what works and what doesn't work. Again, I spoke about a lot of things here. Feel free to pick one thing and just expand it.
I think I'm with you, right there with you, because I get super excited about this topic, and I might just go in many directions. But you actually reminded me of when I was teaching in Rio, your hometown, at FGV, some of my public policy classes, and one story that I remember I got a guest to come talk to us about was about the creation of digital public procurement in Brazil. And to make a long story short, uh, laws and bureaucratic procedures are very hard to change. And the best way to change them, instead of attacking them face on, is just to create a parallel process that works in a different way, usually with a different name. So that's a bit of the story behind how Brazil was one of the first leaders in electronic public procurement by creating, under the same law but with a different name, a parallel public procurement system, right? So if you just expand that logic, that it's always much easier to build something parallel than to fight head on existing institutions and bring it to the state. We don't need to go all the way to Web3 and Bitcoin and things that sound a bit complicated for the people who are not in this ecosystem. But just look at Uber. Can you imagine if I 10 years ago tried to discuss with any public institution that now we're going to allow anyone to drive anyone else in their own car. They just need to talk on this thing that they're going to have on their phone. That would never work. Can you imagine? So changing the taxi system regulations. But what happened was that just happened in parallel, and for a long time, taxis and private app sharing companies are coexisting, and they're going to coexist still for a long time until the most efficient, most effective option survives for the long term. And that's a bit of my vision also for currencies, right? I think that Bitcoin, crypto, all the other private currencies are going to coexist with the fiat currencies that we know for a long time, and maybe for an indefinite time. But eventually, those things will start to sparse themselves and specialize in specific uses. And when we're talking about digital free zones, about all the public services that for us are still very public and very associated with the traditional governmental institutions, I think they're just going to start having now these private, decentralized, autonomous counterparts. Because if you look at history, technology is what shapes government. I mean, and that goes all the way from language, when we were small groups and we developed language, and the technology of language allows us to gather ourselves in bigger groups, all the way to writing, and then to electricity, which allowed for mass society. And now we have decentralized technology, which allows for a global decentralized society. So I think that you're right on point that that transformation is happening. Those things are going to coexist. But what we're living now is more than a regulatory sandbox. It's like it's a societal, it's a governmental sandbox. We're just experimenting with new ways that humans can organize themselves.
Well, that was an amazing response. I was not expecting that. Well, it's good that we get like different guesses here, so everyone had a different take on it. And I 100% agree with you. That's the point that I actually wanted to shift the conversation towards, is the fact that when we talk about Bitcoin, especially, that's something that most people don't realize. I don't blame them. It's not easy to understand what Bitcoin is, but we have to remember Bitcoin is just the name of the native currency for the main net of Bitcoin. So when we're talking about Bitcoin, we're talking about a distributed ledger. More than that, it's also a network that can be also used in a sense of deploying applications on different layers. Of course, it's not as customizable as Ethereum with smart contract, but it's still now you're having funds investing in developers, like designing new forms of applications that can solve real life issues. So I think the most popular one is the Lightning networks when it comes to payments. But the most important aspect of this all is the fact that when it comes to network, Bitcoin itself is a network society. So what we're actually like experimenting not only with Bitcoin, but the most popular network is new forms of societies that are being developed on a technological infrastructure. Not like the internet is not that, but we have to remember people, and you could probably talk a little bit more about that. That the internet itself is not there is no trackability. It lacks like transparency. I think one of the big fights nowadays is trying to like internet got so big that everyone is using it all across the world, but there is a lot of like obscure parts of the internet web. Like we cannot move forward with certain things because at the end of the day, like we still as a society needs a certain level of organization. I think blockchain especially provides that transparency and also able to with certain level of technological arrangements to program abstraction so you keep anonymity in a certain sense, like protect data, but also protect the safety of the network. So once again, I expanded a little bit on the subject, but you can pick one thing and focus on that. So
Now,
you
I think
mentioned the societal thing about it. So if you want to talk about societies on networks, they'll be amazing.
yes, I'm happy to, and I think you've touched upon many interesting points, because this is just a very enticing debate, because it's the frontier of human development. I really believe that. I mean, technology and human development, they walk hand in hand, and I think the frontier of technology really points to the frontier of human organization. To try to bring it back down to so we're not so abstract, but maybe, I don't know. I also have that issue of going to a very high level. I think maybe the biggest problem which we see that makes it seem that the internet sometimes is not working right, especially depending on where you are in the planet, is that the internet by nature is a borderless network, right? It's a global network, but at the same time, it is living right next to very geographical centered governments. So very territorial and very border oriented government. But not only that, people still have very border oriented lives. I mean, the borders of your country usually determine all the way from the services you can access to the products you can buy, but also where you're going to go to have vacations and who you can marry without making it a very complicated bureaucratic affair. So our lives are still very much shaped by borders, but we have this thing which is increasingly in the palm of our hands. And according to this, the latest interview Mark Zuckerberg gave this week, are going to be in our phones, to this internet completely more integrated. You can talk to anyone, anywhere, access services. So these things are clearly in a big mismatch. And when you talk about societies, when you go even further, and people and we just see that all across the world, democracy is living a big legitimacy crisis. I am a political scientist, Ricardo. Don't know if I told you that. I studied political science back in my undergrad, for my in back in my hometown, in Universidade Federal de Pernambuco. I am a very proud Recifense. So, uh, been thinking about this for a while. That did my master's at Harvard and now a PhD at the University of São Paulo. All of them in political science. And there is a definition of democracy, which is basically democracy is a way to have power transitions without bloodshed, which is very interesting if you compare to power transitions that would generate civil wars. But for the 21st century, still seems very little, right? I mean, it's not an accident that the traditional institutions that are dependent on these legitimacy systems are increasingly less um, less trusted and 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 less wanted by the general population. So I think that when we talk Bitcoin, when we talk Ethereum, when we talk any blockchain, what we're doing is having micro democracy experiments, right? Different ways to coordinate, to generate decisions, to generate consensus, which is basically what democracy, what institutions are made for. There's problem solving mechanisms. And what we're having now is just a whole world of possibility of new ways to solve those same problems. So I think that's really exciting, and maybe here to bring it really down to earth. And this was much of my challenge working both at Uber and then at Binance, talking every day to politicians, to regulators, is how do you get the people that were elected, that are usually very well intentioned and have dedicated their lives to solving social problems through these old institutions, to now understand that there is this new way of solving problems, and how do those two things can live together. So I think that's the big challenge for everyone in the Web3 and the blockchain and the crypto community, understanding that old world and trying to build bridges, and not just leaving all of that behind.
Wow, that's amazing. I think, Felipe, this has been one of the, let's say, I try to keep a balance between being, let's say, as stack as possible as I can to explain how this works in actual reality. So we don't end up, just talking about the future, and then the future never actually happens. But a lot of things that we're talking about here, it's already like something tangible. And to be honest, I believe like what we're doing here as in Tools for the Commons, it's about bridging realities, providing the tools instead of burning relations. I believe we should, create like a world where the traditional communicates with decentralized. And to be honest, I don't think we have to push anything. As you mentioned, we can create parallel systems. Like Bitcoin has been there for quite a while. Let's say, okay, like let's not pretend that we didn't have hurdles in this last 10 years, but it's still we didn't need like any big conflict between systems. Like Bitcoin has been developing itself like very pacifically, I would say, and also same for applies for Ethereum. And once the systems merge, all the things that we did in one network like will be integrated into the other one. And in that sense, we are not hindering progress. We are not letting like avoiding like development. We are still trying and experimenting, but at the same time not forcing the traditional to try that and force that in the rest of the population that might not be on the same technological framework still. Felipe, I think we're heading to the end of the podcast, so I'll try to just ask a few questions that are quite important, I think, not only for Latin America, but also for Asia. So we know next year we have the Brazilian CBDC Drex being launched, and with that a very robust legal framework for Brazil. The framework now actually the laws that will provide a foundation for the Brazilian digital rail. But I also like to hear from Hong Kong as well. They're developing their own CBDC. So we have 10 minutes left. So if you want to talk about that, feel free to.
Perfect. Yeah, happy to. Yeah, we get carried away. Those subjects are super exciting, but coming back to our day-to-day life, I mean, before we compare Asia and Latin America, especially when we're talking about finance, I think it's worth bringing a bit of the history, right? So first of all, especially I'm now sitting in Hong Kong, which is a big, not only has been historically a big champion of globalization, but right now is sitting in a very particular position, right? Hong Kong is maybe today the biggest bridge between the US and China in a world where those two major powers are increasingly closing themselves off and having a strong barrier and tariff war against each other, right? So Hong Kong historically has had a bridging role between the East and the West, and increasingly more, especially when we look at finance. Uh, it is already a special economic zone for China, and it's a history. It's a region that historically has not had uh, much, if any, capital controls. When you look at Latin America, it's the other way around, right? We are a region who has suffered a lot with hyperinflation. So capital controls are at the core of the fiscal and monetary policy of most Latin American countries. And I say that because maybe the key aspect of crypto is exactly the fact that it's borderless money. And when we're talking capital control, it's exactly the thing we were discussing before, right? Border oriented institutions that are fighting this borderless logic of the internet. And in that context, I mean, Brazil has, I think, a very prepared body of public servants, as well as very enthusiastic leaders, both in the CVM, which is our Brazilian SEC equivalent, as well as in the central bank. So, and as I mentioned before, we also have one of the countries with maybe the biggest institutional flexibility and willingness to experiment. And I think proof of that is that the two institutions have already done a lot of sandboxes to experiment on crypto, blockchain, and everything. Now, the big challenge there is going to be how do you incorporate that willingness to experiment with a long history of capital controls and ordinarily a mostly closed economy, especially on the financial side. When you look at the other extreme, and it's also curious because I think 3 or 4 weeks ago we also had here by the Monetary Authority of Hong Kong a big sandbox. But how do you take a place like this where maybe the institutional adoption is much bigger, but how do you bring the everyday user to have maybe a little more of a taste of the average Latin American, right? A bit more enthusiasm and risk propensity when we're talking digital finance, and bringing it not only from a institutional perspective of free free movement of capital by the big players to the everyday lives of the citizens. How can they experiment? And in real life, that means that the average person selling hot dogs or selling food in the streets in Brazil can maybe get a loan with access with very low international interest rates, at the same time that the average Hong Kong citizen can maybe experiment with lending for some project in Latin America with a much bigger potential return rate. So I think that's the middle ground that we can aim, and that these two regions have to learn from each other.
Wow, amazing, Felipe. And well, I will not pretend that I'm not, like I'm a huge fan of globalization as you. I have international experience, more specifically with Asia and Brazil. And to be honest, I can't wait for these Asia regions to be integrated, not only technologically, but also culturally. And I think there's so much to be built together. Well, we only have 5 minutes left, and I'd like for you to leave a message or even, just a projection about the future for Latin America and Asia, how they can cooperate with each other, what is the strong points from each region. And well, that's it. Feel free to.
So, if you allow me, I'll take those last few minutes, first of all, to once again congratulate you on the work you've been doing, and just to invite everybody to get to know the Tools for the Commons more deeply. I think I've seen a lot of initiatives, and I think this is one of the shining stars. Uh, I think that the people that are working right now to create a bridge between this potential future, which is full of possibilities, and the day-to-day lives of people with free economic zones, with allowing access to justice, to any other type of rights, is exactly what makes a difference to make those realities come true. So, I mean, I know you're always talking about it. I'm always talking about it also on LinkedIn. So I invite everyone to really participate, engage, because I'm sure that when we bring this to our daily lives, there's not only a lot of opportunities for entrepreneurial activity. I mean, there's a lot of money to be made, but also it's just a fascinating community of people that I think we need to grow, and leave that invitation open to everyone.
Well, Felipe, it was a pleasure to have you with us today. It was an amazing episode, one of my favorite ones so far. Of course, time is kind of limited, but we will have more opportunities to talk with each other. And let's say, I would say next year will be our big year when it comes to Tools for the Commons. We did a lot of background work this year. It's commons like we are in a building stage, I would say. We need people at the forefront on the stands talking about everything that is being done to the masses and public, but we also need background work, and we are at this stage. We're launching a product. I think providing Brazilians with an alternative not only to investment but for business as well when it comes to digital free zone. It's quite important at the stage that we are right now. I think the economy can be, can move faster if we are not trying to, go against the public mainstream, but instead of that, like finding new ways. Crypto has been like that. Crypto has been an alternative to investment, and now we have the opportunity at Tools for the Commons on building alongside TradeFlow with decentralized internet infrastructure, a way of like us organizing ourselves digitally. Well, once again, Felipe, I'd like to thank you for your presence. We have only 2 minutes left, so if you want to pitch your social medias, feel free to. Awesome.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I mean, I agree with you. I think this is an invitation just for not the average person, but for the politicians, the public sector, the private business leaders to get to know this and then bring their organizations into it. So if anybody wants to keep the conversation going, LinkedIn is by far my most active channel. So it's Felipe Oriá. It's easy to find it there. And it was my pleasure, man. Thanks so much for having me.